wave height and a subsoil.
Well, it's also upper level winds create this.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Air movements. The biggest, you know what the biggest sources of these low frequency sounds are in our environment normally? Riding in a car. I've got a different study, we can't spend time looking at all of them, where riding in a car subjects you to somewhere around, was it 80 or 100 dBg?
So I guess the bin item that hopefully we can solve before a month from tonight, when we talk about this again, would be, well, twofold. One, should we even regulate DBG? So we need to become more familiar with it, and then at what level?
That's what I'm going to be consulting with
I
Husky.
think all you need to do is bring back the chart where you took the 3 distances and then you took the, it
Yeah,
doesn't even reach that level anyway.
Well, if you read Hessler's report, he completely says these low frequencies are no problem at all. But obviously, and the reason I put the Rand Ambrose report in there to read is, there are too many people having some sort of problems, that there isn't something going on. The plain fact is, they don't know just what it is. Although there is another report, which I didn't get the original on, so I didn't send it out to people, that another person is thinking it's not the sound, it's pressure variations when you're in the downwind side of the turbine. Eric will be more familiar with this. He's probably seen the, I bet you've seen as part of the Air National Guard films of the turbulence behind an airplane from the wings, vortexes. There is a downwind vortex from a wind turbine, and it's significant. In fact, that is the biggest reason they separate them by a certain distance. It isn't that you couldn't get, you couldn't put them closer together as far as getting enough wind to build power, but that downwind vortex from one will interfere with the second one and make it much noisier, as well as cutting down its power.
Isn't that why the current study has to say they're all running at full power? The current requirements that we have.
Well, that's when they're doing the predicted levels.
That's what I mean.
They
Right, that's why we do that probably.
Yeah.
So I would say that we need to read the hazard report and the Rand Ambrose report again, and maybe the SALT report, right?
Yeah, I can forward, well, I can forward a half dozen more studies to you.
Well, if you send me the links to the reports, okay, then what I'll do is I'll post the links to the report on the website so everybody can go read the links to the report, including the public. So then we can come back, but I mean, rather than keep belaboring this DBG argument right now or discussion
I
now.
know, but I wanted to let you know
I'm-
why I'm recommending
I'm-
certain things.
I'm agreeing, so, but I would like to think about it, and I'd like for Hesher to make a recommendation in
Yeah, oh,
the next 30
and
days.
by the way, he's had a major project which he was finishing this week, and he basically said it would be the end of this week before he could get back
That's
to
okay,
the beginning of next.
That's fine, as long as by next month we have.
Yeah,
an answer.
I bugged him again saying, can you give me some idea when you're gonna get back to me again?
So, let's go back to the standards.
Yeah,
So now we have something else to look at, and we know what the safety levels are.
yeah, so you, okay, so anyway, the real question, there is no need for a 4-season sound study, period, that's what I'm recommending.
So, let's just beat the horse about 2 seasons still a little bit. So
Okay.
what are we gonna get, Bill, what do you think we're gonna get for 2 seasons?
You get a range.
That's pretty much it, you get a range.
What's the benefit to the town of understanding that range?
Well, you can show people how in the summer, there's gonna be higher masking noise most of the time, which is when people would have their windows and things open. That would be the one advantage that I can think of.
So it's really to the developer's advantage to do too, not really, because we don't really care.
No, we don't, and what's gonna be the defining standard is still gonna be the
Because
quiet.
we're gonna tell them that we're gonna go with the quiet standard to make the rules, not the.
Well,
not
that's what the ordinance calls for, and that's what everybody recommends still, is
Right.
using the quietest one. So the only thing you're doing is getting, again, a comparison for, as far as for being, determining compliance or anything, the second study is useless.
So Vern, what do you think, 2 seasons or 1 season?
One.
Okay.
So you want one or two, Dave, what do you think?
I'd go with one, if, you know.
Unless we get, I think if we explain to people why the second one is basically useless, why are we requiring two? And it's that much more data for us to look over, but we're not gonna do anything with the second one. What we need, and what is still done later on, is specifying that the one we're looking at is done during that quiet period of the year.
So, will the quiet period of the year then be, I mean, we'll just throw this out there as a discussion, not like advocating. Clearly, up here, most of the leaves are gone by like mid-November. Well, first November, a lot of them are gone. By mid-November,
Mid-end of November.
so we probably would always be looking for a study that was done,
End of November through, my bet, it depends on when the leaves start coming out in the spring. If a guy misses it in the spring, it's too bad, you're gonna have to wait until next November.
next year.
But he'd have to do that anyway.
We do with the snow.
Snow actually just makes it a little quieter, but not always, because you can get different things crunching in the snow, so there's probably no advantage.
So probably by, just generally speaking, if we were gonna put like a guide date in there, it would be from, you know,
Well, we're
December
gonna-
1st to April 1st.
If we wanted to put a guide in, yes.
So studies done outside that may be more questionable.
Highly questionable.
What if you just said leave off, does that make it quiet time?
Well, that's what it says in the ordinance right now, and I was going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the thing is, kind of going along the lines of a couple other issues. I mean, we know when leaf off is or whatever, but I'm basically probably it's okay to do that, but I was just wondering if we wanted to put like a safety factor in there and say typically this season, if you just didn't narrow it down flatly, they said typically, and that would guide the developer to try to do it between like the 1st of December and the 1st of April, and then that would reduce the amount of arguments that people had to have about leaf on and leaf off, because I think everybody agrees, if leaves are off by December 1st, I think everybody agrees that there's no leaves until after April 1st.
You put it in as a guideline. I'm not against that. It's,
So we're gonna go with one study,
which means you have to change the wording slightly, so it's more like the study shall.
and we're gonna leave leaf on, leaf off is season only.
Excuse me. And that's actually covered later on here, so there's gonna be a little rewrite, but this was the first,
And then the guide will be from December to 1 April, just to have help future boards come to decisions. Not every future board's gonna have lived through this.
oh man. Okay, I saw no problem with our section about qualified independent. Okay, the next thing I've got, and we're still waiting, this is one of the things that's in the Hessler to be reviewed, I asked him about, because a lot of the, I will say some sources are now recommending, in fact, the European studies where people are talking about them having very low sound levels, like the Danish ones, where they're recommending a 30 dBA level. What a lot of people don't realize is that is a yearly average. Which means for part of the year you could have much higher sounds.
Yeah.
So when people talk about a level, you have to come up with the time frame as well.
So you're saying that because they're including the times when the turbines are not spinning at all, right?
Yeah, they'd be included, it's a year, well, I didn't read the whole thing, the one thing I did notice is it was a yearly. There's a lot of sources recommending, in fact, that Air Force thing that you forwarded to me,
That they do study,
they use the DM, the day-night.
big night, I know.
Day-night average. Now, the thing about the day-night average is they add for the nighttime hours, to adjust for the, to make sure that you're taking into effect that those are quieter, you add 10 dB onto it.
Right, they give you basically a penalty.
Yeah, they penalize you for that, for using, but I was going to it's one of my things that I've run into Hessler to comment on. Is there any reason for looking at day-night versus hourly? Some people are saying because of the variation in the sound levels of the turbine, and it's one of the biggest differences between it and a lot of other things, is that a longer period is more appropriate. I'm asking his opinion on that.
I mean, I could say it would be rational to do it day and night, and that's why we do it day and night, because
Well, it averages it out.
that's why frequently we don't let some types of aircraft leave until later in the morning. We don't allow them to launch.
Keep the average down.
Well, because I can tell you that we'll get phone calls that some aircraft launch at 05, but if they launch at 09, no one seems to care.
Absolutely. I just put this in as a note at this point. Also, the references protected locations are going to be standardized. Okay, the next thing, the shadow flicker and blade glint assessment study. Notice I said we take out and blade glint and glint. The rationale for change: there is no way to predict blade glint from a modern pitch-controlled wind turbine. There are too many variables. Not just time of day, time of year, angle of sun. Every different wind speed is going to have different pitch angles on the blades. It's absolutely impossible to predict. But on top of that, as several studies have said, because of the shape of the blades, and
So you're saying it's a standard that was applicable 15 years ago, but not today?
Exactly.
So would we, if we were going to not have it, would we?
We still keep the standard for the non-reflective coating.
Right, and then the other, right, I'm agreeing with that, but then would we also say that you have to use a pitch-controlled wind turbine? What if it was a non-pitch controlled wind turbine?
You're not going to see any of those. And the reason is non-pitch control, we're called stall regulated. And as you know, the pitch control turbines, when the wind speed gets up to a certain speed, they basically feather those, they turn those
So they're not,
blades so that they're no longer generating lift and they bring it to a stop. So it doesn't self-destruct.
right,
Stall regulated, the pitch doesn't change on the blades, and just like an airplane, when it gets too far up, at a certain point it loses all lift. But the side effect of that is they get noisier, and the faster the wind, the even noisier they get.
so would we be able just to say stall-regulated wind turbines are not allowed?
You could actually add that, but you're not going to find anybody trying to install.
I realize that, but to cover the whole, so.
Well, no, the thing is, if somebody turns in the specs for one of those, the sound's going to go off the charts at the top end. They're not going to make it
Yeah.
anyway.
I
You're
don't
gonna
think that would
worry
be-
about
All right.
In other words, with a pitch-regulated turbine, the sound quickly comes up to almost a plateau and then levels off. With the stall-regulated, it just keeps climbing. The higher the wind, the more sound.
I'm tracking.
So anyway, the thing is, where this used to be a problem was like 30 years ago with the first ones, and at that time they were making, the blades were shining like propellers on planes. It's not a problem anymore, but we're covering it a little further down.
I noticed who was chosen by the Pine Board, that's been edited out. Just curious rationale.
Because it's normally done by the same consultant, usually that does the sound study. And this is one of those things that frankly is not of great, it's usually not of great controversy, because where people are arguing a lot over sound, when it comes to the, shadow flicker,
Mhm.
is pretty much a straight geometric
Um,
study.
Would it be appropriate to say something in there who is approved by the planning board, or at least so the planning board has some kind of advanced knowledge of who is doing it?
Yeah, that would be fine, who's approved, but,
So that we're not picking the guy, but at least we have some say-so and,
right,
and
I think that's a good idea. So change it from, who is approved by the planning board.
Well, okay, well, wait, we're not even gonna do it though, right?
You still are doing the shadow flicker.
shadow.
Oh, you're saying,
Shadow
okay, you're
flicker.
gonna keep,
There
okay,
still has to be a study.
You
on
still
it.
need a
Question
shadow
is who
flicker.
does it,
okay, so the blade glint is gonna disappear,
yeah.
the shadow flicker is gonna stay.
But it has to be studied and by someone who's got the appropriate,
Mhm.
uh,
There are places where that is a major problem. If you're less than 2,000 feet from the turbine in particular, and the turbine is to the west or east of you at certain times of the day, you're gonna get that coming in your windows. And it's more a matter of annoyance. There is no actual, there's no direct health effects, other than some people will get headaches from having a flicker like that. But there's no, some people have claimed it will trigger epilepsy. There's another whole study saying, sorry, it's out of the range of epilepsy, is not going to happen. Some people will get headaches from having a constant flicker for a while.
Did any of these studies that you looked at, did they impact on livestock, for example? Impact on livestock? Horses, cattle, whatever?
No, not really. There's been a lot of research done with sound at very high levels with animals. But of course, most of the studies done with sounds on animals are at very high levels. We're talking levels where there's damage, 120, 150 decibels. And then autopsy the animal, oh yeah, we got all kinds of things that happen to them. Well, if you're exposed to 150 decibels for 6 hours, you're gonna have
Is 1 mile adequate, should be bigger?
what's that?
The study radius will examine the area within 1 mile, is 1 mile adequate, or should it be larger?
For shadow flicker, it's adequate. The reason being, you basically don't get any shadows beyond somewhere around 2,400 feet. And that has to do with the physics, which I looked it up, I didn't copy it off, but I actually looked it up. The sun is real big, the blades are real narrow, a shadow from them tapers. Plus, in the atmosphere, you have aerosols and other things that scatter the light. Within 2,500 feet, there is no shadow anymore.
So you're saying that 1 mile is a factor of safety of 2 versus what it
It's basically a
actually
factor of
is?
safety of 2.
Okay.
In fact, most of the places that ask for studies, they limit it to like 2,500 feet or 3,000 feet. Some limit it to a mile, but going beyond a mile, it's not going to be a problem.
Okay.
It's the physics make it not a problem.
Could you go back up, please? Let's hit that whole paragraph.
Okay.
Whoops, stop.
These are all the things, I left all the things in because it appears that all of those are still applicable. These are just the things that have to be taken into account.
Under sensitive receptors, did we, back in the definitions, I forget, did we,
We haven't put the two of them together yet. I've been too busy on this.
okay, so we still need to come up with a definition for sensitive receptor, is that correct?
That's correct. We're going to be combining sensitive receptor with protected location.
Okay.
And probably, looking at the literature, the most common thing is sensitive receptor because you include more under that
Okay.
as a rule. That's the way it's usually done.
So we need to define that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we had asked for an actual paint sample. As we found out, they're proprietary, They don't give out paint samples, and quite frankly, what can you tell looking at a paint sample? What is important is the actual certification. And there is actually, which I haven't obtained yet, a certifying standard for that.
Also, presumably the manufacturer, the paint manufacturer would do it, but would you accept, say, a certification by the developer?
Now, the certification is actually one of those
ISO?
one of those ISOs.
Standard.
Right. I haven't pulled the numbers, but I will. But basically, you see what I'm gonna take out, and then we'll just add at the end, that the certification.
Whatever the ISO standard is.
Right, we'll just add that standard in afterwards. And we'll probably add after it or equivalent in case they use a standard by another agency. That makes sense? Visual impact assessment study. I basically said we would use the definition, which includes the different areas, rather than using the one in the comprehensive plan, because the comprehensive plan could change, but it's not of the same legal level as the ordinance.
So the ordinance is stronger than the comprehensive plan.
Right. And I don't think we should have comprehensive plan defining, being able to change the ordinance. And we already said that in Article 18, we were going to list all of those as the scenic resources.
So if the plan, for some reason, wanted to change the ordinance, then the plan should just say so. The
Right.
plan should say we recommend that the ordinance be changed to reflect the following specifically. So then it's not ambiguous.
Correct.
So maybe if we're in a comprehensive plan, some section in the plan, there should be like a whole chapter on the plan, do recommendations for ordinance changes. That would make it
If you
easier.
go through the comprehensive plan, there are over 80 recommendations just for the select board that, as far as I can tell, have not been done. And you don't want to count how many there are for us. It's less for us, actually. I pity the select board if they actually read the comprehensive plan. I don't think most of them have.
Well, we need to get on that later.
Okay, next, the wildlife and
That's the next
habitat.
meeting at 9, you know that?
Wildlife and habitat assessment study. This is now covered in Article 6. In fact, your Article 6 thing even mentions those same two
Agencies.
agencies. There's no need to do it here as well.
Okay.
Okay, sound limit parameters, I just changed that to SPS 18 because that's where the definitions are going to be now.
Okay. So wait a minute, hang. That's just A, right?
A, yes. In other words, we did have it in
Right.
section D here, it's now in SPS 18.
Right, okay, got it.
That's one of the minor changes.
Wait, come down. So I want to make sure I just read through this again with you and
Oh, you want to go back up?
just a little bit, just,
Yeah, no problem.
oh, good. So as far as the pre and the post values, is that accurate?
That's a whole other discussion, which we'll be getting into.
Okay, so maybe you could write down, because I don't want this to kind of get stuck in there, that it was discussed at some point when this gets discussed, okay?
Yeah, because it's gone into in the appendix, and if we change the appendix the way I'm hoping to, that will change.
Okay, so can you just give us like a down and dirty for how it will change, or what's just
Okay.
like?
Here's the rationale behind the change. I'm basing this on Hessler's work as well. Right, there's been him and a couple of other people that have pointed out that this was one of the, you have a problem when trying to measure the sound after construction of a wind turbine project. And in all cases, what you're regulating is the sound produced by the project, not the background sound that exists, the sound produced by the project. It's difficult to do. So what happens is one of the techniques, and again, this came from some Europeans that decided to stack this method, was you turn the turbines off and make a set of measurements. You turn the turbines back on and make a set of measurements. The problem is there's no way that those two periods are going to be the same for the background sound.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
They can't be. It's physically
impossible.
impossible. So the developer may get an advantage in that the sounds are lower when they do it with them on in the
Right.
background, or he could be penalized because they were lower during the time they happened to have them turned off.
Right, but it's not, the fact is, it's not consistent or predictable.
It's not predictable. And you'd have no idea ahead of time which way the advantage is going to go.
Okay.
Okay? So Hessler has come up with a method in that report for measuring the sound first from the wind, around the wind site at your measurement points, but also picking 4 more points 2 or 3 miles away from the turbines in cardinal directions. And basically you're measuring the background sound at the same time you're measuring the turbine
Oh,
sound.
right,
And correcting.
Take an
right.
average.
You're getting a lot more representation for background sound.
Yes. And I'm proposing that we change it to that method because it's more accurate. In other words, you don't penalize the developer and you don't
Penalize the community.
the community. His method is a little more complex in some ways, but it's more accurate, I think. And even he admits it is not perfect. But
Yeah,
it's-
but it's better than, this is like a, yeah, I mean, reading it now and understanding some stuff that we've gone through, I agree.
see, what's happened in many cases is a lot of these ideas, because wind turbines were so new, were pulled out of the hat, literally. People said, well, how are we going to do this? And they said, well, let's do it this way. And then when you start thinking about it afterwards, some of them don't actually turn out to work all that
I know what, there's been a lot of thought into how sound works, and the thing is if you look at a lot of these standards, I mean, it kind of almost looks like they took the, and just in general, people took like stormwater and grading standards, and just replaced water with sound, and then just did the same type of standard, you know, and because, but it's not, it's two different things.
Yeah, but you also have to understand that this sort of method, with it on and off, worked well for a standard power plant. For instance, if you were doing a study, and that's another one of the huge sources of the low frequency sound, you know, that gas turbine plant, they put out huge levels in those super low frequencies. But anyway, when they're doing a study for something like that, yeah, they can shut the plant down, but they actually take the measurement of how much it's putting out for sound afterwards when you have calm conditions. And remember, even back during the, when we were having testimony, how Mr. Wallace mentioned that they were trying to do one of these post-construction sound surveys at, I forget, some site where they've already been built. And he says they've been waiting a couple of months for the conditions when the sound near the microphones was under 4 miles an hour, basically, and still producing full power at the turbines.
All right.
Extremely difficult to do.
All right.
So
I get
anyway.
the gist. This actually sounds like, I'm interested in looking at that.
Okay, and so yes, my proposal is going to be that we will be taking that out. Basically, we'll be saying the post-sound study will be done per the appendix,
And-
the appendix. will
Then
list-
B, under the general sound limitation standard for protected locations, that's also gonna be done. We're talking about sensitive receptors, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Now, one of the things that we did before, we simply said, compliance requirements at a protected location. Well, how close to a protected location? That would mean, when you're talking about residences, right at the residence, well, for one thing, you can't take an accurate sound measurement at a residence. All of the standards call for the measuring instruments to be at least 30 to 60 feet away from any buildings, because they'll upset the readings from reflected sound.
Yeah.
So it makes most sense to make it within, the standard seems to be for a lot of places, it varies. There's a couple of places that have 500 feet. I thought that was way excessive. The ones I've run into looking at the most of the other things is 100 feet. Does that make sense?
It's opportunity.
So you're only allowing a differential of 5 dBA?
That is the new recommended one, and the basis for that is, actually, you can read part of it here. If you look through a lot of this literature, and you know what, I'll forward a whole bunch of links to everybody because you're gonna get buried. We are an extremely quiet rural area. And at least I know as I've been reading all of this, I am sensitive to the fact that people are going to hear these at times. But if you look at the literature as well, and in fact, if you read some of the Ambrose, well, not that one I sent you, the Ambrose Rand report, but some of these other ones, and some of the other people, even the EPA came out with a thing back in the 70s, I think they did the original study, saying that if a sound increases only 5 dBA over the background sound, the level of complaints and annoyance is extremely low. There's still going to be some people that are going to complain. But when you get to 10 dB sounds twice as loud.
Even more than that, wouldn't it be, than 5?
No, it's a logarithmic scale. 5 dB is normally considered perceptible. 1 dB, you can't hear the difference. 3 dB, some people, it's considered the barely perceptible.
So if it isn't 5, then you'd have to go to 10.
No, you could go to any level in between.
Well,
Five,
if there's
I
no
picked 5 as
perceivable
a
difference between 5 and 6, other than the
Well,
measurements.
except for the fact that it is logarithmic, so that change from 5 to 6 is a lot more than from 0 to 1. It's not double, it's a logarithmic scale. A 10 dB difference is 10 times, but to your ear, it sounds twice as loud. Again, the ear doesn't respond linearly either. It responds, it's got its own funny response. In fact, the ear has different responses at different frequencies.
Different frequencies like we already saw earlier.
Even its perception of loudness is different at different frequencies. I recommend, we already have the 35 dBA that we added in there at the last change to the ordinance. I'm recommending that we stay at that 35 dBA level is actually lower than Hessler recommends in his own literature. It's lower than most of the other sources, but it's right in the range. Remember some of that stuff in acoustic ecology? Anybody here been to the acoustic ecology site? It's a good site that has a lot of reference material. What appears to be happening is that the people that have been extremely low are saying, well, we may have gone a little too far, and they're coming up some. And the people that used to say, 55 is fine, you're not gonna even notice it, well, they're admitting that's too much and they're coming down. What seems to be happening is that the two sides are coming down to between 30 and 40.
Well, if is it conceivable though that you could have a quiet atmosphere, and just based on your little demonstration a little while ago, if you're standing out there and you just have background noise, or with the ambient noise out there could be at a 37, so you'd be technically in violation.
Well, no, you're not counting, this is just from the turbines themselves contributing 35. And yes, that means on a super quiet night, somebody may still hear them if the turbines are at full power. Because if it's a super quiet night and there's no wind with the turbines either,
Not gonna hear it.
or sound. What this does try to address is the fact that that sound is variable. There's going to be times when it's higher, but again, you're looking at a 35 dBA hourly limit.
Okay, now, just to kind of frame this out a little bit, because earlier we talked about why would you not have like a day-night thing?
Well, again, the thing is, will it be an hourly, will it be a day, night?
That's where I was going with this, because see, this is even like an all mixed around strategy here of hourlies and days and nights or whatever, and so to me, I guess what I'd like to see Hassler discuss, kind of in memo for us is to, if it needs to be hourly and day and night, and it needs to be that complicated, then it needs to be, but, to me,
Well, it's gonna be one or the other, it's not gonna be both.
well, right now it's both.
Oh,
Because you say hourly, and then we have two different times.
those are.
Well, that's how we've been doing it.
Yeah, that's how we've been doing it.
Right, we have hourly and we have day and night.
Well, we had two separate sound levels, one at night and one during the day.
So we're gonna say it's always gotta be 35, is what you're
Well,
recommending.
here's the thing, if it's 35 at night, it's not gonna get louder during the day.
Well, correct.
And so why have a higher sound limit during the day when people are more likely to be outside?
Right.
The idea is to, as
So you're
little as
actually-
possible, and
So you're saying this actually is a more restrictive standard?
Yeah, we just made it more restrictive.
Right.
And this is pretty much where everybody seems to be heading, is between 30 and 40.
Oh, I see, because actually if you allow that variation, you're gonna go to 45,
Well, no,
you could go up to 50 the way it is now.
yeah, you could,
Right, and we don't want 50.
yeah. Or 5 dB pedal, or 5 dB, where is it? Oh. Yeah, or more than 5 dBA, which is greater over the location measured sound. And the reason for that is, if you've got a location where it's already 45, well, why would you want to limit the wind turbines to 35? At this time, that wouldn't apply, but 10 years from now, some of these areas may become noisier. At that time.
Well, I've spoken to the town manager up to Mars Hill, and on the westerly side of the ridge, which runs north and south, none of the complaints came of perceived health issues came from any homeowners on the west side of the ridge, which is the side of the town.
Mhm.
Everything came from the east side, the Canadian side, which is very, very rural. And if you look on Google.
And not only that, it was a situation with a steep ridge line, and it tends to be quieter down there because of the direction of the wind. It's on the downwinds. Mars Hill is actually a poster example of one of the worst sightings ever done, in the same way that wind farm in California, which is right in the middle of raptor country, that everybody always uses as the example of how many birds it's going to kill. There's one wind farm that kills massive numbers of raptors, and it's the one everybody brings up. I forget the name of the canyon that it's in, but pretty easy to Google
But I
and
mean,
find
in a
out.
situation like up in Mars Hill, the ambient noise includes all the traffic noise, you know, you got a ski area during the wintertime that the chairlift is running all the time, and,
Oh, okay, hang on, so just, the other thing is, the 5 decibel penalty is applied for tones. Now, what's gonna happen with that sentence, Bruce?
Okay, which, I've still got this, actually Hessler likes okay, tones, this is where it gets a little complicated too. Is there anything here simple? Right now, tones are defined as IEC 61400-11. And if you remember the Delta report for the Vestas, that would be a good example. In fact, shoot, I've got it here somewhere, but the procedure, if you read through it, and I've actually read that standard, is extremely complex. They use what's called a frequency spectrum analyzer. They break it down into little, depending on the frequency, 2 or 5 hertz bandwidths, plot them, and then if any of them stick up higher, for that one little frequency by more than 6 dB over the average, it's tagged, and then it's analyzed, and they take in the frequencies next to it and measure their power levels, and if those are high enough, it's considered masked, and if they're not high enough, it's not, so it's considered to be a tone. But then they take and do this 12 separate times, and then they average it all together. So, for instance, if you take a look at that Delta report, it says that there are possible tones. What that means is, in one or more of those 12 separate analyses, 12 different sets of data, a tone showed up. But if you take a look at the chart on the page of the Delta, they have a series of the possible tones. Those numbers they give are the averages. The averages, in some cases, were actually negative. In no cases were they more than, I think, 1 or 1.4 dB, and the standard itself says, unless the resultant is 3 dB or more, it's to be basically ignored.
So you're recommending that we do a tone study, is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm recommending we use the same study that is used by DEP here in Maine, which is simple, it's easy to understand, and it's actually based on the EPA recommended definition of tones. And basically, instead of going through this extremely complicated determination that the IEC 61400 one does, it splits it up instead of into little 5 hertz segments. It takes each 1/3 octave band, and then it compares that to the 2 beside it. And if that one is louder by over a certain level, and the level changes by frequency, then it's declared to be a tone. What happens with this IEC one is, in the first place, it's taken, all these measurements are taken only about 350 feet or 400 feet from a turbine. They're designed to measure the sound power. The tones at that distance, they even say right in the standard,